Welcome to Inside the Castle, the podcast that goes behind castle doors to have real conversations with real people about solving the nation's toughest challenges.
I'm one of your hosts today, Aaron Schneider.
And I'm Angie Fryermuth.
In this episode, we're learning about possibly the most important role in the Corps of Engineers, how the business line managers work within their portfolios. Today, we have Lisa Kiefel with the Flood Risk Management Business Line Manager, and Mindy Simmons and Danielle Tedesco with Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration. Before we talk about business line managers and what the heck they do, Angie, do you really have any idea what they do? I mean, I hear this term business line manager, but I don't know what a business line manager would be, especially if I was just coming off the street or didn't have experience with the Corps.
Well, I think I had been with the Corps probably for, 10, 12 years. And it wasn't until I started getting into the leadership development programs and being around my awesome mentors within planning, when I was sitting in planning, that I actually even heard the term business line managers. So for those people outside of the Corps, they're probably really confused. But I think it's probably something we can call the way we do business, and it aligns with the mission of the Corps of Engineers. So usually there is a business line manager for most of the missions within the Corps of Engineers.
And I've always just thought that these were the people in charge of all money, and that, he really needed to get on their side to get anything done around here. So, but I bet you we are completely wrong. And that's why we have this great group with us here today. So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for inviting us. We appreciate being here.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Looking forward to the discussion.
All right. Well, I can tell already that this is going to be a fun podcast. You seem like a great group on here. But before we get started talking about the ins and outs of business line management, could you each tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this position within the Corps? So Lisa, we're going to start with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm Lisa Kiefel. I've been with the Corps over 20 years. I started in Portland District in the appropriations, or the what they call the programs branch. And so I worked for investigations, construction, and O&M on all business lines, helping to develop the budget for the districts, working really closely with project managers, going out and doing site visits to learn about the projects and why they were important, and then advocating for those up to our division level, which is the Northwestern Division. After a few years there and doing details in certain places, I then got the position at Northwestern Division as the investigations as well as the continuing authorities program appropriations manager. And at that point, I started working with all of the districts in Northwestern Division. So there's 5 of them, and putting together budgets and learning to support and advocate for those when those budgets go to the headquarters level. I also worked on the flood risk management business line to make sure that all came together from all the different individuals who are involved, which there are a lot in flood risk management, to make sure that all their information was then understood and included into the portfolio. And that really got me where I am today, to really focus in on just that advocation role and really my interest in more of the bigger picture and the strategy. And so that led to my position here at headquarters. I came up in 2014, right after the Water Resource Development Act was passed, that changed a lot of our processes and policies. And so I came up focusing on planning. So I was in the planning community at that time and wrote a lot of the implementation guidance and some things like that, which really changed a lot of how we do business within the Corps. And then that kind of led to the position of becoming the business line manager, which focuses on so many different elements and aspects, which I'm sure we'll get into. But it really kind of honed in and gave me a good insight and background to be able to advocate and understand all the different intricacies, so I can help make sure that our most important work in the flood risk management business line is supported through the administration and Congress.
Hi, so I'm Mindy Simmons, and my current position is actually called Senior Policy Advisor within the Planning and Policy Division at headquarters. But it's been a long path to get to that position. I, like Lisa, started off in the Portland district. You'll see a theme here with the three of us from the Northwestern Division. And I actually worked in a lot of the Portland District's fish-related programs related to fish passage at dams on the Columbia and the Willamette, and really was in more of an implementation role of really trying to put projects on the ground, but I was also managing the program and trying to get the funding to do so. I came back to headquarters in 2012 on a temporary assignment within the Northwestern Division Regional Integration Team, and then did another temporary assignment in our Programs Integration Division. And for the core programs, when we use the term programs, we really kind of mean budget. And so that's the group within the core who Lisa and Daniela and I work very closely with to manage the budget. And so in that role, I was actually supporting the navigation business line. Things are structured a little bit differently now, but really got my hands dirty in the budget process, really figuring out how that worked at the national level and how all those different cogs in the machine fit together. A couple years after that, I did actually do that position permanently too. And then in a couple years took a different role, which is officially the same position that I'm doing now, but I'm just doing slightly different things. And that role involved being the aquatic ecosystem restoration business line manager, among other things, where I worked on the aquatic ecosystem restoration program, but also did more policy and more content within the program, I would say, on execution of specific projects and working on policy also. So now my job had many different roles. We have since taken the business line manager portion of that role and pushed more of the budget function over to Daniela, which has been amazing to have that support. So now, as we'll talk a little more later, she and I work very closely together on different aspects of that program, and which has been a really good partnership to make it go a lot more smoothly, I would say.
I'm Daniela Tedesco. So the fun part is that I think it's very interesting that Lisa and Mindy went first, because my job right now is basically a combination of one of Lisa's old positions and part of Mindy's old job. So a lot of deja vus. And I also come from Northwestern Division, so another deja vu in like the three of us. So I'm an engineer by trade, and I joined the Corps 10 years ago. Actually, 10 years ago, this August will be my 10-year anniversary. I came from the private sector, and I was actually working on a lot of core projects across the country as a consultant. But when I was working in Portland, I did a lot of work for the Northwestern Division and their Columbia River Basin water management division. So it's basically large-scale reservoir operation and management of the entire system. And it sounded so much fun that I decided to jump to the other dark side, so the opposite dark side. And I came to work for the Corps. I think I worked there for a few years. I worked on things such as the Columbia River Treaty, which is fascinating to me. So I got a little bit more involved in policy. And then I sort of did the same thing that Lisa and Mindy did, because that's what the Corps is fantastic about, that you can try different things and see how they fit. It's like dresses, this fits. So I'm going to try and buy a permanent dress instead of just like borrowing a dress. And so my dress was coming up here and doing a detail and peeking in the land of planning and programs, which I really did not know what it was about. And I liked it so much that I managed to get one of Lisa's old job as the investigations and CAP account manager at Northwestern Division. So she kept the chair warm and I sat on the same chair. And then I came back here a few years later after a couple of details to work in one of the regional integration teams. And I don't know if you ever interviewed people, but they're pretty much like super coordinators that represent and collaborate with divisions, very specific divisions. In pretty much anything, any topic, any issue, any project. And last year, I took this job, which is half is what kind of Mindy said. So I'm like her other half in terms of budget, so I'm the money. And then the other half of my job, which is Lisa's old job, but I'm the planning portfolio manager. So I pretty much keep an eye and try to coordinate on the planning side, but on the budget side and execution side for all our planning studies. At least I try my best. We have a lot of them going on right now. So I'm trying to juggle a little bit of both. A lot of times, sometimes they overlap, and a lot of times they do not. And so it's been kind of very fun to see both sides of the aisle.
Well, thank you all for being here today. I think it's going to be a great discussion, and I find it interesting every time that we do these interviews to hear of everybody's story in their careers. That's the best part of the core. Like Daniela said, there's so much that we can learn and so much we can try out, like dresses. And so, so thanks everybody for being here. Let's get into what it is that you all do on a daily basis. So talk to us about what a business line manager does in case there are employees out there that would be interested in doing this in the future. So Mindy, we'll start with you, and then Daniela and Lisa, if you have anything to add, just feel free to jump in.
Okay, so I would imagine that each of us would define what we do slightly differently. The role of the business line manager is not actually written down and defined anywhere clearly. So I will do my interpretation of that and my experience after working in this realm for a while. So I see it as really you are focused on the programs and the budget aspect of that mission area that you're working in. So I almost see it as a subset of that larger mission area that's related to all the other things that are going on within that mission area that you also need to have your fingers in and be tracking and have awareness. And so it's really focused on trying to have a handle on the portfolio within that mission area and the funding associated with that portfolio, what the projects need, what the programs need, challenges that they're having, either getting what they need or executing what they have. And also a big piece of it is managing the relationships with the stakeholders and our non-federal sponsors who also have an interest in those projects and programs as well, and advocating them. So I really see business line managers as skills that you need to have. I really think we're like gatherers, organizers, and synthesizers of budget-related information. And really what we end up doing with all that is repackaging that information once we've gathered it and communicating what needs to be communicated to a multitude of different audiences. So, we're gathering information from, usually directly working with the districts, but often a lot of who we work with is at the Assistant Secretary of the Army, at OMB, often, directly responding to congressional inquiries, and then other stakeholders as well. So you don't necessarily communicate that information in the same way to those different audiences. And so it's really important to understand who you're trying to communicate with, what you're trying to communicate with, and package it in a way that they understand. All the while making sure that your information is consistent and that the other people who are communicating about that program and project in that mission space are also communicating the same numbers and the same key messages. And so you really need to have a lot of relationships at those different levels within the core and also outside of the core in order to have the context to be able to do that effectively. We work a lot with different groups within the core, very closely with the programs folks at headquarters, at the MSCs, and then also I would say even the congressional liaison folks and the future directions as well, just to try to have messages be consistent. those are a few things. I'll let Daniela and Lisa chime in because the jobs are huge and there's more than that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Mindy mentioned, the collaboration part, and I was thinking a little bit on how to explain where we sit in terms of organization. And I feel like if the account manager are more like the vertical, sort of the vertical building blocks of how we go about with budget and business, they are responsible for specific accounts like planning studies, like construction, like operation and maintenance. I feel like what we do, we're the horizontal ones. Like we're the ones that go across all these accounts and all the different things that the core does and try to sort of mesh them together so that like everybody is in sync and everybody is coordinating with each other. So I know that because we are such a very large organization and very complex, some people are like, why do you actually need business line manager? You have X, right? And we're like, well, it's that interaction that sometimes gets lost when you start going into these like vertical roles. And then I think when you are asking, what do we do every day? I feel like there are some things that are pretty consistent. So this is my second round or second year sort of being a business line manager at headquarters. So last year for me was very much a deer in the headlights trying to figure out what I was doing. This year, I have a little bit of a better understanding, but there are definitely things that repeat themselves every year because our budget cycles repeat themselves. But even in that case, because of timelines and different events that just sort of happen, that sometimes gets a little mixed up and a little like thrown caution to the wind in terms of trying to do that as well. We have certain things, like I said, that we repeat and we manage, and then we have other things that just really change every day. Like there are a lot of projects with issues that that we're trying to coordinate. There are things that people want information on. I feel like I've never had a dull day ever, which, most people, for most people is a good thing. For some people might be like, they want a job that is a little bit less, just a little bit less riding it out. But if people really like challenges and they really like to be engaged and to sort of also have a finger in different things, I feel like this is probably the job for them.
Well, I think those two just did a fantastic job. I think what I would add to that is I think a lot of people think when they think business line managers, they think of budget, they think of money, they think of the green shade, and it's like, ugh, how awful, right? How boring. You just crunch numbers all day. And I think that Mindy and Daniela really hit it well that maybe at this level, but I think really throughout the core, because you got business line managers at the district, you got them at the MSC, and you got them at headquarters. And the role for that person is, yes, you want to put funding on the most important pieces of work, right? And we get to focus in on certain missions, but they're all the key missions of the core to deliver really important work. And what the business line manager does is, we got to get those prioritizations right. And we got to sell them, like Mindy was saying, in a way to what our audiences understand. But in order to do that, we have to have that information. And so it's really those relationships, and it's then working with the folks as things change. Like Daniela said, you'll get a work plan, you'll get a budget, and then you'll get like all these questions from Congress all at the same time, which changes the scenario of what we need to put forward. And so we need to be able to call someone up and say, I got a 5-minute time frame here. I need to get a change, and it needs to be right and consistent. Otherwise, we lose the confidence of the administration, of the assistant secretary, of Congress, and then we will hurt our being able to deliver on these very important pieces. And so I think, really, we spend a lot of time in spreadsheets, but it's the relationships that we build in order to deliver and to be successful, which is really the fun part. The reason why I think we're all doing this job is that connection. And I think it's really the business line manager role to really understand what is the important piece of information we need to be able to deliver, because we have such technical fantastic, brilliant people working on these projects, it gets to a point where it's like, okay, no one's going to understand that piece of it. Is that, what is the most important piece, and be able to convey that information, like Mindy was saying, to what the audience can understand, and not saying at all that we're dumbing it down or anything, but just being able to deliver it in a way that's understandable. Because if you talk in a way that people don't get, they're like, whatever, it's not as important. But you need to be able to say the so what, and that's really our delivery is all about the so what. What's the consequence if we can't deliver on these projects? And so the decisions that are being made, that can be informed. And we are there to provide that information and to inform that. And I think at the end of the day, that's what's expected of us in this role. That's fun to us in whatever weird way. I think that's why we enjoy this position as much as we do.
Thanks, Alan. And thanks, Lisa. And when I think of money and spreadsheets, that's what gets me excited personally. So I guess, the economist in me is like, it's all about the money. So it's been interesting hearing you guys talk about, the consolidated message and that information. And a couple weeks ago, we did a podcast on the appropriations and authorization process. And we've heard a few references to budget here. So kind of wanted to step back for our listeners a little bit. And Lisa, would you be able to describe for us really how this process works? Like, how do you guys get the information and the budget request from the district staff, and how does it come to you? And then where does it go after it goes to you before it ultimately gets released as part of a president's budget?
Absolutely. It's a really exciting process. I'll start it off with that. Yes. So we, as the business line managers, we actually write what we call a program development manual. And so we provide each year, like, what our priorities are, what certain rules need to be followed, how to prioritize the data, anything that's changed in the administration, all the way down to, our chief, the assistant secretary, issues that are happening that we need to focus in on for budget development. So we provide this guidance out in the fall. So we'll just start it off in the fall. So right after our fiscal year starts, we provide budget guidance, which is for 2 years in the future. So then the field being the district, begins to put in budget packages into, they put it into a database that the data is put into the database. What the field does is they start working within their own, like in operations, in the construction, the E&C community, planning community for investigations. They work within each other to identify what the needs are with their project managers, and then they enter all this data as to what their capability is every year. That is then due to their division by around February, March timeframe. And then their prioritization is then ranked across the regions. And then that data is then submitted to headquarters come May 1st. Pretty much that is the set standard. That is one of the few schedules that we actually know that will be handled every year. It will be in that manner. Then the headquarters receives that data. We prioritize it. We work back with the MSC, and we submit that to our chief, and we recommend to him that, given all the information that we've compiled and all the work we've done with the field, these are the most important, most critical pieces of work for our chief to submit to the Assistant Secretary of the Army. That happens in July. That person's team works with us, and then we work with the staff level at the Assistant Secretary's office to develop what the Assistant Secretary will put forward. And what I think is really important is that the Corps' role is to be the technical expert. And so what we put forward is the most critical work and the needs funding-wise based on technical information. The Assistant Secretary, however, has more of a political piece of this. So things can change between the Assistant Secretary and our chief on what is prioritized and put to the administration, because our roles are different. We have actually different reasons for why we have all these different levels looking at this information. So the Assistant Secretary then provides it in August. I believe mid-August, they provide it to the Office of Management and Budget, to OMB, to the President's staff. the recommendation, which is usually different than ours, but not by a lot. And so then that begins the conversation between the assistant secretary, and we're there as the technical experts to help support them defend the budget with the administration. And that happens until usually around Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving time is when we receive what we call the pass back. It's when OMB passes back questions to us and says, this is what we're thinking. It's like what we do with our own MSCs when we go, hey, what do you see here? Is there anything that we're missing? If there is, let's talk about it. So that's our opportunity through the Assistant Secretary's office to identify issues that we would like to highlight to the administration. And so this is a real short term. It's like a day or two that we have to review it and then provide our information back, which is fine because we already have an understanding of what should be in there. So it isn't that difficult to figure out what we need to highlight. So we have that back and forth then with the administration, usually through Christmas time, if you will. Then they finalize what they're going to put, what they call the president's budget, which is then released. It should be, in the past, it was always released like the first Monday or Tuesday of February, the first week of February, it was always released. And that really gave Congress an idea of like, okay, it's now released. This is what the president has put forward. What do we want to do with that? Do we want to agree with everything that was put into the president's budget, or do we want to add? Do we want to change some of the pieces in there? And then let's check back with the Corps to find out if some capabilities have changed since they submitted it. Remember, it was almost a year ago that we submitted that information through our chief. And so a lot of things do change. So once the president's budget gets released, that starts this process of what we call defense. That's when Congress says, why was this put in for this? And they start asking really specific questions on why things were budgeted the way they were in the president's budget. And so we go into defense mode, which is something that we are really keen on. And we've been spun up to because we have to justify every single thing that we put into the original budget submission. And so what we do at that point is we have all the backup. And then we supply our chief and the assistant secretary with that data information for hearings that are held to support what was in the president's budget. And then that starts once those questions are provided to us, either they were answered during the hearing or we get to answer them off the record or on the record. I don't remember what we call it, but we submit those back in. And then we also then start on capability drills, which are ran through the Assistant Secretary's office for those changes that I mentioned, because it's been over a year since the budget was submitted. And then that is what usually results into execution. So 1 October is when that next fiscal year will start. And so either we'll get a continuing resolution or we might get a bill passed. And at that point is where that turns into reality and Congress provides us a bill because they do hold the actual final say on where the funding gets put. And so that appropriations bill provides us, then we see the outcome of that labor that took quite some time actually then gets provided out to the field and we start executing it. And so then our role is to watch and to be able to identify areas that might need to have increase in funding or that may no longer need funding, and we can start working with the field on what we call reprogrammings or reallocations and some of those tools that we have to make sure that the most critical piece of work, even all the way through the process, we are always trying to make sure that whatever is most important is getting the money that it needs. So we're problem solvers, if you will, during the execution time to help get the money where it needs to be placed. And so that's really the full cycle around from beginning of budget through defense and execution.
So how does like supplementals or even the newly reintroduced earmarks and all of that apply to your job? Like, does that cause more confusion and then require you to go out and have more coordination? Just curious about that.
Yeah, so I think while Lisa was explaining our very, very easy process, right? The thing that I was going back was the question of like, what are you guys doing every day? And so referring back to that is like, on any given day, we can be handling anything that goes from what we're doing now. So right now we're in the 24 fiscal year. So current execution, we're working on like what the president has released as the budget for 25. And at the same time, we are now preparing our budget for 26. So they get a little crazy. And I think to answer your question, Angela, yes, supplemental definitely throw more heat to the fire. And earmarks, which came back a few years ago, are actually a very, very also interesting combination of even more complexity and more coordination that is needed because they are so public. Another fun fact of why people are like, why do you also work for the Corps of Engineers is because we also sometimes get a chance to go and work with appropriators and authorizers and kind of help them out. And so last year I had a chance to be on the Hill and kind of help out the appropriators on their appropriations bill, looking at our budget request. So supplemental throw a bit of a wrench because they are sometimes sort of attached to like annual appropriations. Sometimes they're kind of like thrown in. And that means a lot of additional funding that takes on a lot of requests for information to be able to provide the backup information that Lisa had mentioned to be able to support Congress's request, not just like, you know, how many projects are out there that fit a specific category or need that Congress has identified based on disasters that have happened, or maybe just specific funding categories, like in the bipartisan infrastructure law has funding not just related to supplemental in terms of disaster appropriations, but you know, we got a lot of funding in the aquatic ecosystem restoration business line, which is a little bit like the one that generally does not get additional funding related to disaster supplemental, right? And earmarks are, you know, congressionally directed spending, community project funding, however you want to call them. They're also sort of bringing up the game up a notch as well, because now all of a sudden you add the laser focused attention of congressional members to a very specific project that they're interested in. So, so there's definitely a lot more spotlight and a lot more coordination in the sense that, again, it's something that is very public, like member of Congress put out their request on websites. We're trying to be very careful and very communicative from the get-go when somebody's asking us information about a specific project where they understand that there is need for either funding that has never been given to us before to do a study, for example, or for funding that is needed because it was, you know, sadly not included in the president's budget recommendation. There's, you know, there's so much work to do and not enough funding to go around for everybody. But also like to things that maybe we have received funding in or we have recommended funding as part of the president's budget recommendation, but we have an additional need. So that's definitely like bring it to the third power of our coordination and the needs for coordination when these things come into the mix as well.
And I've got more to add to that also. So to clarify a little bit of how the earmarks or congressionally directed spending have impacted us. One thing Lisa referred to is that, you know, we put forward the administration's budget, they release it, and then, you know, but Congress ultimately decides what we're appropriated. And so typically Congress wants to give the Corps of Engineers more money than what's in the president's budget. So in the time when earmarks were not there, and just for simple numbers, let's say the president's budget was $5 billion for the Civil Works program. That was a few years ago. Now Congress wants to give us $7 million. So that's an additional $2 billion that needs to go somewhere that they couldn't directly say where they wanted it to go, even though they generally had ideas where they wanted it to go. So essentially what the Corps would do, and this would come back to the business line managers, and we'd essentially go through that whole budget cycle again with that additional money, where we're trying to figure out where do we recommend putting that money to. Often it was to make up for some of the gaps that happened when we're budgeting 2 years in advance and we don't necessarily know exactly what we're going to need. So that allowed us a little bit of flexibility to almost like rebalance where things were going. Plus, it would also give us some ability to add in high priority new projects. They would usually let us know you can start 10 new studies. So now that those have returned, a lot of that flexibility has been taken up by those earmarks to where now Congress is telling us exactly where we're going to put the money. And so that can be good, for a lot of projects that maybe otherwise wouldn't have received it. It's made it a little challenging because we have a little less flexibility to help, provide those projects that maybe didn't have enough, the money that they need to keep going. So I think, just since they've been back a couple years now, I think we're starting to see some of the challenges of how are we going to keep the projects going that we've started, because we may not necessarily have enough money to go around, which has always been a challenge. Don't get me wrong. It's just now, there's certain members who really want that project to keep going. And like Daniela said, they're going to be laser focused on it as well. So it's made it an interesting landscape for those of us who are trying to figure out how do you put the money in the places where we really need it.
I got something to add onto that as well, focusing a little bit more on the supplementals, right, that came in. So starting back in 2018, Sandy, of course, the Sandy superstorm, we had some funding for that as well. But really starting with the what we call the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, really infused a lot of funding for the Corps for long-term solutions in flood risk management. And it continued, right? So we received funding after that. So basically around $24 billion was infused into the flood risk management alone, flood risk management program through the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed. It impacted all of our different business lines also. But what those really did for us was it let us start actually providing some implementation of some projects that we had finished the studies on, that were authorized, that were ready to move forward on. And so that was a huge, huge benefit. And I think a really loud message, I think, to everyone that the Corps was respected, they were needed. The country wanted that work to be done, right? And so we were able to really get some of our backlog, if you will, some of those projects started and moving forward. But what it also did was it started a lot of projects that now are within our appropriations. And as Mindy said, not only do we have earmarks that are reducing our flexibility, having that big chunk of projects started and a bunch of studies that are completing that are now saying, look, we have projects ready to go. There is a lot of work, real important work that needs to be completed, started, that we aren't going to be able to support in our appropriations. And so how do we communicate that? It's not a Corps problem, right? It's something that we talk about with our stakeholders, with our leadership, with Congress, the administration, our sister agencies, right? How do you coordinate with communities and how can they help themselves? We've got what we call P3, opportunities to figure out how to get sponsors to be able to put funding in and to support and move things forward, to be able to get stuff completed, because what we really care about is delivering, right, on all these projects. And so these types of supplementals that we've seen in the last 6 years or so are incredible. And I think they'll probably continue. And what that told the Corps, we have historically in our operation and maintenance appropriation been kind of stagnant. And so it's like, what can we do just to deliver our projects, just to maintain and operate? If you need to repair it, boy, you better be, you got to have a long lead time on that one, because we just don't get a lot of money to do those repairs. What this influx of funding did was say, okay, be ready, Corps. Be ready for when we do get some money that comes in, that we can do those smart repairs. Maybe we even become more resilient, right? What should we be doing to our projects? How do we look forward? And so I think what it did was it really refreshed us into going, all right, that is actually a realistic opportunity that might be coming. So while we're a little concerned as business line managers on how we're going to fund all these things to completion that we've started, it got the Corps, I think, really kind of, okay, we can actually start looking at what do we do if we do have an opportunity with more funding and to be prepared for that. So I think we're in a real exciting time right now, just given the recent history and that wasn't just a 1-year thing, right? We've gotten it over several years now. I think that has really allowed us to have more opportunity as business line managers to start preparing ourselves by using our community and be able to talk through how to be prepared in the future. So I feel like it's really helped us. It's helped us move forward and to kind of freshen ourselves, because before we could talk about it, but no one would believe us, right? That one day we could get money in and we could, think, be strategic. But now I think we really are. And we're having those conversations with a wider audience well outside the Corps on how do we deliver what we need to deliver for our nation. And so I think it's a very exciting time. And a lot of it had to do with these supplementals.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And listening to you all today talk about this, I feel like the mental gymnastics you guys have to be going through day in and day out has to be incredible, because you're building a budget while you're executing budgets, you're dealing with supplementals, you're adding in new authorities that is creating more for your portfolio. I feel like I could talk to you for days and days about this, but unfortunately we are nearing the end of our time here together. I did want to see, like, for the field, knowing that you guys have this mental gymnastics and you've got to be the ones communicating, you're the ones advocating, what should somebody in the district do? Like, what's the most helpful for you to make your job as easy as possible so you can be that advocate? Like, what do they need to do? So Lisa, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Aaron. No, I appreciate that. So last year, FRM, right? So we're so diverse. We do technical assistance, we operate and maintain. We do everything in between. We have engineering, we've got experts that are doing modeling, we've got, coastal as well as inland. And so we developed a community of practice. So we have the FRM community of practice. Someone in the field, if they would please join the community of practice, that's a way for us to be able to communicate together, to be aware of all the different things in our community to keep us abreast, right? Maybe you're in a district and you're working on something and you can hear like, oh, we're going to have a webinar on that and it's something of interest. Just staying more in tune with each other, I think is really what would be most helpful. So then that way we are understanding what's out there, or understanding what the needs are, and we can communicate better. When it comes specifically to budget, though, I have to say data quality and including in what it is, the way that we put our data into the database is how you communicate with us at headquarters, right? We actually read line by line all that information. And so the programs folks, so if you're a PM out there, work with your programs folks in the district to make sure that they enter in the information and we can understand it. And that way we can deliver what it is they need to deliver. Those two things would be fantastic in my book.
I will reinforce exactly what Lisa said, which I think is very important. I think this is one question we might all answer exactly the same. We do have a community of practice. It's a little more broad, but the piece about data quality and ensuring that your data are in there consistently and that it makes sense, and that we use the term that it tells a story. And we don't mean that in the sense of you're making something up that sounds really cool. It means it needs to be logical and consistent, that the dollars that are in there and the different codes that we ask you to put in there are logical and are consistent with the justification that you provide. And the other piece of that, in the community piece that I would focus on, is developing the relationships with if you're in a district, develop the relationship with your MSC or division business line manager, because they're the ones who we communicate more directly with. And so having that relationship and understanding what they do and knowing that they understand your project and your program and can advocate for it was really, really helpful, because there's a lot of information flow and it flows quickly. And in different directions, and having those relationships to where they can call you and ask you quickly, hey, did you really mean this? We think you meant this, but your code says this, is really, really important. And that helps us advocate for your projects and get the right information to the right people. So having that data quality, consistency in the story and the messaging is really, really important. And the relationships to communicate that to all the different people is really, really helpful.
So I was going to say something completely different. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just actually repeating the same, because I think the first thing that popped into my mind was exactly data quality. And so that one, I think they both covered that really well. I think the thing that I wanted to add about data quality is that it would be wonderful if, as business line managers, we had all the time in the world to sort of dig into the information and digest it and ask more questions. The reality is that a lot of times we're getting asked questions with a turnaround for answers within sometimes 5 to 10 minutes. And it's not just like, oh, you're just kidding. And I'm like, no, literally, we will get a call back from the Assistant Secretary of the Admin's office or the Office of Management and Budget within 10 minutes, sometimes to the clock, which means we don't really have a lot of time to coordinate. So that's why it's also going back to the original part of the podcast where I think both Mindy and Lisa talked about relationships. So for us, it is extremely important to build those sort of like networks, almost like spider webs, where if we can't have the person that we really need, we know where the tentacles are, and we can call the other 3 or 4 people to just basically get us what we need to be able to answer questions. Because sometimes really decisions are made very fast, and if we miss a chance, we're just kind of missing the chance, and we really don't want to miss it. I think the second part, to tie to consistency, is that we don't just provide information in our, let's say, in our budget request, right? We have information when the president's budget is released. I don't know if you covered it in other podcasts, but we have hundreds of pages of sort of specific information related to each of the projects that we submitted a request to Congress for, which is very different than other appropriations and other federal agencies. And so it is really important for us to have that consistency, not from like one year to the next, because people are going to look at what we said that we were going to do a year later, like a year, well, at that point, a year before, but then now it's going to be a year later. But it's also, what did we tell Congress, right? What did we tell the administration? What did we tell our stakeholders? What did we tell the public? So everything has to be sort of in sync. And I feel that because our complexity is so high, and then our coordination needs to be so high for all these reasons, then it's really, really important to have a consistent message on all levels and sort of like spread across business lines and accounts and with everybody.
So just to add to that, that was a beautiful thing to bring up, right? The consistency is important, but I didn't want it to sound like you have to stick with whatever you put in a year or 2 years ago. What we do need to have from the field is, how do we explain the change? Because things change. So I just wanted to make sure that folks didn't come away from this thinking that, no, you got to stick to it. You said it. It's like, no, we definitely agree, and not agree. We definitely understand that things change and have no problem with that. It's when we can't explain it. And so just if you keep that in mind, that when your change is there, go, wait a second, what did I say a year ago? And so what Danielle is saying is like, there is a whole chain of stuff that's out there. Take a look at that and then make that link, tell the story, like Mindy said, of how, that weaving story of how we got to where we are today, but reference all those old pieces of information that we already provided. And otherwise, we might not be able to defend what it is we're trying to do. So
I would add to that also is anticipate the questions that you think might get asked and provide that information proactively, because that can save a lot of time and back and forth where we have to go back and ask the MSC and then they go back and ask the district. It's like, no, think about what somebody at headquarters might want to know if your story changed or why something might be a little off. anticipate that and give us that information proactively.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Lisa, Mindy, and Daniela, for joining us today for this edition of Inside the Castle. We appreciate you and your insights. Until next time, be safe, be innovative, and ensure your data quality.
Thanks for joining us for this Inside the Castle podcast. To provide your feedback, email us at cw.infrastructure.team@usace.army.mil. Stay tuned for additional Inside the Castle podcasts as we explore life inside the Corps and revolutionize civil works together.